Hello, and welcome to EU Perspectives. Today we are diving into the topic of the future of European defense. Here in the studio with me are three guests who will each provide their point of view on the current state and the future of the industry. We have Mr. Jan Farský, member of the European Parliament for the EPP Parliamentary Group. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Juan Mejino-López from the Bruegel think tank. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Burkard Schmitt from the ASD Europe Association, who will represent industry. Welcome. So thank you all for coming. Let's begin with where we are today. Russian attack on Ukraine 2 years ago completely changed how we talk about defense in Europe. So, Mr. Farský, from your point of view, has there been a substantial shift in the last 2 years?
Yeah, I'm definitely sure that there is a change, but not sufficient. We didn't do enough. I see that the war on Ukraine started in 2014, not 2022. But we still pretend that we live in peace times and that we don't need to take care of our defense industry, of our defense policies. We still live in a fragmented Europe that makes the Europe vulnerable and fragile, and that's I think we have to solve. And till nowadays we still don't have enough tools to improve the defensibilities of Europe. But it's not the European, let's say, EU question, because the defense is on member states. So it's just about the member states, how much of their defense policies are able to share across the EU or across the NATO for a better investment, long-term investment, and economy of scale. And I think that all of these topics we have to try to change. Otherwise, we will stay vulnerable, and I don't want to live in unsafe Europe.
We will get into what the national countries and what the European Union can do later on in the debate. But for now, Mr. Schmitt, from an industry perspective, do you see a rising interest in the defense industry? And is the industry ready for that?
Let's say, I mean, I agree what you just said. A lot of things have changed since 2022, but we were not fast enough and not bold enough. If you look at the challenge that we are facing, I mean, industry started at a very low level, right? We had a defense industry that was tailored towards the needs of our armed forces of the last 20 years, and this was peacetime. So we had a defense industry that was operating in a peacetime modus. And out of a sudden, everything has changed, and industry also has to change. But the problem for industry is that you don't change an industry overnight, right? And in that case, it is a particular challenge because this industry depends on national governments as customers. So they can only follow what member states and what national governments as customers tell them to do. So everyone was taken by surprise in February 2022, even though there were signs, right? We would not have had to be surprised, but we were taken by surprise, and now everyone tries to catch up. And again, things have changed since then. We can maybe elaborate a bit further on, but there's a lot still to be done, this is clear.
Mr. Mejino-López, so defense spending is clearly rising, but there are people saying that it is not coordinated enough, that we are spending the money, but it's not effective. So can you give us an overview of the situation?
Indeed. So I think it's important, I agree with both speakers, I think it's important to see where we are coming from. So we are coming from a situation where we had defense spending around 3% in Europe in the 80s. And this has constantly decreased till now, basically, and both in particular in defense overall spending, but also in the equipment spending. And this means that at the industry level, the investments going and the procurement carried by European governments has substantially fallen. So the production capacities has, of course, decreased, and now we are trying to build these production capacities, and indeed it takes time. For some particular projects, it can even take decades. And then the second point, once we know where we are coming from and we recognize, we accept that the investment was not sufficient and that we need to catch up on these aspects, we can move to how we coordinate the spending, and in particular what we can buy and how we need to buy it. Because it's not only a problem of the amount of money, but also how we spend the money. And here is where the EU, I think, can play a very significant role in establishing certain standards and also enforce the standards that we should be having. For example, in types of weapons, in ammunition, there are standards that need to be satisfied and that the war in Ukraine has shown that we were not enforcing. And also, when the member states, because this is a national competence, are spending and are carrying the procurement, they do it in a coordinated way, and they do it through joint procurement procedures that we can get better prices, better delivery times, and we can give strong signals to the defense industry so that the investment is going to be there, and they can carry certain investments that need, as I said, decades. And of course, they need a clear signal of that the market will be there for their products.
Mr. Farský, the European Union can incentivize the national governments to do joint procurement, but ultimately it's up to them. So do you think there is the political will to really do that?
You are right, because there's a problem of a political will. Because we have 23 states of the European Union that are also the members of NATO. And each one state built its own national security, national defense policy, national defense industry. And those are the roots of the fragmentation. Looking at the defense systems. In Europe, we have 178 defense systems, number of main battle tanks, jet fighters, and so on. In the United States, they have just 30 of them. So they can really focus on research and development, in industry, long-term orders, and that's helpful not only for the industry, but also for the business, and also in the end for the security. So that's something we have to do, and we are still in the beginning. I think that we still don't feel the threat enough somehow in the countries, and for many countries and governments, it's more important to let's say to give the jobs to the industry than to build a security and defense abilities, not only for the states but for the whole Europe. Because I think that it's necessary to build a European pillar of NATO. Otherwise, we will be in a threat of becoming a prey of anyone.
Mr. Schmitt, is joint procurement something that the industry wants?
No, absolutely. It is clear that one of the problems is that we have, as long as we procure nationally, we have small production volumes. Right? And this is not good from an industrial perspective either, because it brings up the costs per unit in particular. So from an industrial perspective, there's a clear advantage to go for joint procurement and to aggregate demand. And this is exactly where the weakness of Europe lies today. Right? It has been said before. You have national organizations that define the military requirements. NATO at the higher level basically sets the capability targets, but then every member state goes back home and does it in his own way. And at that level, I think we would have to have a much better coordination in order to translate the capability needs that every member state has, defined by NATO, translate that into what we call industrial output targets, right? How much do we have to produce in order to address the common needs? Because at the end of the day, the needs are common. Right? We have a common interest to defend EU and NATO territory. But the thing is, it is divided then into national turfs, and to bring it back together, this is the challenge.
But ultimately, doesn't it mean that some national companies lose out? Isn't that bigger competition for them?
I wouldn't say it like that. I mean, in every process, you have winners and losers. Right? But industry will adapt. Industry will always follow the market. And if the market is aggregated, industry will join forces and set up joint ventures or so. So, I mean, again, I think that it is, particularly in the long run, I think it is a must. Otherwise, you cannot compete from an industrial perspective with the big American suppliers or in the future Chinese and others that are merging. Right? I mean, this is at the global scale, these are the competitors if you only take it from a purely market perspective. And there you have to have a critical mass. And again, history shows that it works. If for example, our association also represents the commercial aviation sector. When you look at Airbus, it's a perfect example how integration can be to the benefit of all, right? And I think in many ways we will have to follow a similar path for defense. It does not mean that you will have Airbus defense now everywhere, right? But I think it sets an example that it is in the interest also of industry.
Mr. Mejino-López, if we don't coordinate better, what will be the consequences?
Well, so I think the consequences will be if in the future we need to face, or we are still facing the conflict in Ukraine, but in the future we need to face a conflict in the EU territory or NATO territory, will be underprepared. So as Mr. Farský was mentioning, for every model of military equipment that the US has sent to Ukraine, we are sending 4. This reflects the fragmentation that we have in the national markets. This also reflects the higher prices that we've been paying and the lack of capacity that we are now building. But still, as I mentioned, it takes time. So I think we need to improve the coordination at the European level, and of course, at the end of the day, you need to also grant the trust that the member states have. So we have an economic problem. We need the money to fund this issue. We need to compensate the underinvestment that we have. But we have the political problem of building the trust among member states, because of course we have seen in the past positive experience in terms of integrating the market. I don't know, some national countries, they lose their national airlines company, but for defense companies it's a bit more complicated, because you want to know that you can trust the other member states to actually produce military equipment that you might have. And as we also know, the perception of threat is not the same among member states. So basically, the closer you are to Moscow, the more you spend in defense. Mm-hmm. And this is a very clear correlation that we need to address, and we need to create that trust that will make the economic coordination and will eventually help to fix the economic fragmentation problem we are having.
Mr. Farský, you are the politician in the debate, so how can we do that? How can we ensure that there is more solidarity between the member states?
Yeah, it's a difficult task, but I think that we have to solve it. It's necessary, because it was counted by, I think it's EP Research Service, that we can save through better cooperation something between 25 or 75 billion euros a year, while we cooperate our defense spending, and so it's helpful for economy, for the effectiveness of spending money. It's also helpful for the European industry and to European market, because in the past years we bought almost 80% of defense. We spent almost 80% of defense spending outside of Europe, and 63% in the United States. But through this money, we could build industry here. We could build research and development in Europe. We could have more well-paid jobs here. So that's something we should look at not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Maybe it's a threat for some companies that are not competitive in the defense industry, but it's an opportunity for the whole Europe, because spending money on defense, let's say not only defense but resilience, is also spending money on infrastructure. Let's say the dual-use spending. So it's about not only infrastructure as a transport infrastructure, but also a data infrastructure, energy infrastructure. It's better and higher investment in research and development that we are far behind United States and China. And it's also a question of better education in the States and industry again. So through the investment, through the European investment in defense, we can build Europe safer, stronger, and more prosperous. With the same amount of money we use, we can get much more if we cooperate. And so I think that politicians should go this way, because that's the only possible way for Europe, I think.
Mr. Mejino-López, you wanted to react?
So I wanted to comment on what you just said about the scale of the European industry. So it's actually the distance vis-a-vis the US is really scary. So the main three companies in the US, they have the same amount of revenues as the top 27 European companies for 2024. Of course, the situation can be improving, but the huge distance in scale is there. And now we are seeing our American counterpart going abroad and signing huge deals with foreign countries, and that means eventually higher scale for the American companies. Eventually also on the duplication of costs. So the fragmentation leads to duplication, especially on research and development costs. If we are investing in 3 different types of combat aircrafts, that means that we are putting resources towards 3 different research and development projects, and we can save on that a lot of money, as you just mentioned. And finally, on the reliance, so we have done some research at Bruegel about how much we are buying from the US. So we believe we have the numbers and estimates we produce indicate a lower reliance, so we don't really see the 80% for the overall Europe. It is true this holds for countries like Poland, mainly purchasing from the US and South Korea, but in the case of countries like France, the UK or Germany, most of the procurement is basically bought from national providers. So this basically reflects when you do have the national industry, you buy from your national industry. And it is true that we have some reliance for products such as air defense or aircrafts from the US, but this doesn't hold for other type of equipment where Europe does have the industrial capacity to actually provide it.
Mr. Schmitt, ASD has been very vocal about the need to buy European. So what are the benefits of that? And is European defense industry comparable to the US one? Historically, there have been lower investments, so are we on the same level?
Now, I think it is interesting and important to have the US in the back of our mind when we discuss these issues. Because what we have seen over the last decades is not only that we invested very little, but we also, Europe, entered into a kind of a voluntary dependence on the US. Right? There are many reasons why you buy from the US. And it is not only because their equipment is so well performing, it is also that you think you buy the security guarantee that comes along with this. So you make yourself dependent in order to make sure that the US will help you eventually, right? And this is, of course, a dangerous bargain. Right? It can turn out to be dangerous, as we have seen in the energy sector, for example, with the dependency on Russia. So being dependent can fire back, right? Comparing the 2 industrial bases is also, I would be a bit careful. Of course, they have huge volumes, and this enables them to be very competitive in certain things. But this is also the product or the result of a clear US political strategy. The US want absolute dominance, right, and autarky. They want to be able to do everything themselves. Right? We never had such an ambition in Europe, neither collectively nor nationally. Right? So we have to take that into account as well. And we as Europe, we do not need everything that the US has. I wouldn't go so far, right? But we should really take as a starting point what are our capability needs and what kind of industry do we need in order to satisfy these needs. I may come to the conclusion to buy certain things outside Europe, true, but what are the capabilities that I rather prefer to have here? Right? Not only for an industrial reason, but for a technological and strategic reason. Where are the areas where I do not want to depend on a non-European power? And here, I think what you said before, trust is an issue, right? Do we trust each other more than we trust the Americans? And I think it's an interesting with this phase in which we are living. I think it brings many things to the forefront. And I would also agree that we still, after all these years of integration in Europe, we lack trust in each other. Right? Because you should argue that you are safer if you buy in Europe. Right? If the producer is on your continent, it is in an allied country, right, that is next to your border. I mean, this should put you in a better position from a military point of view, even. And this is maybe my last point. I think we should, I think, reconsider how we consider defense industry. Because we used to consider it as an economic sector. It's an industrial sector, specific, true, but it is an industry, so we have to be competitive and so on and so forth. I think in the times that we are living, I would always advise to consider defense industry as a defense capability, which is very different, right? If I agree that I have to have, in order to defend myself, I have to have a certain military capability, satellite-based reconnaissance or so, right? But you also need a defense industrial base to defend yourself. If you don't have that, you can find yourself in a very tricky situation. So I think this is the way we should look at defense industries these days.
You mentioned in the beginning that the industry needs time for adjustments. Do you have a specific time frame in mind? Because, you know, there is a sense of urgency right now.
No, it's very different, right? I mean, we have seen, first of all companies in Europe have invested enormously, right? It's not that they haven't done anything. Right? But there is only a certain point to which you can do that, because, I mean, they are defense companies, which means most of them are listed on the stock market. And so you have to fulfill certain criteria vis-à-vis your investors. And you cannot take unlimited risk. This is what we often hear from governments. Yes, 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 it will come, it will come, it will come. Yeah. You can prepare that, but from an entrepreneurial point of view, you can only do it to a certain point, right? And then you have to have the contract that ensures you that the equipment will actually be bought. Then you can ramp up your own investment also. And this is where also European member states have been very slow up until now. Right? So it has been a lot of announcement, and again, a lot of things have been ordered. I don't say that nothing has happened, but if you really want to scale up a lot, and this is actually, if we stick to our words, if we say that, yes, we should prepare, we should be prepared by 2030, I think that we would have to scale up a lot more. Which means that you would have to invest a lot more and very fast. So this is, we are at a point where it is high time to do that, I think, right? And again, timelines, it depends on the equipment that you look at. You have seen in the ammunition, okay, the EU has not fully fulfilled its promise towards Ukraine to produce 1 billion rounds or so in a year. But again, here the production capacity has improved a lot. But the more complex the equipment becomes, the more difficult it is also to ramp up production, right? If you want to ramp up the production of main battle tanks or combat aircraft, this takes more time because you have the whole supply chain that you have to mobilize with you. Normally when we talk about defense industries, we think of the big companies that we all know, right? But these big companies, they have an enormous ecosystem of sub-suppliers that they have to mobilize as well. Right? And for that, you have to have certainty. You have to have a visibility over what will come over the next 10 years. If you don't do that, it is a big entrepreneurial risk for the big OEMs, but also for the sub-suppliers.
Mr. Mejino-López, we will get to the financing aspect, but for now, are there any downsides to choosing to buy European? Is there any way it could backfire, or are there only positives?
So I think the downsides are indeed that we lack the scale that we should have created, and the US side has this scale that some European national companies don't. So the downside of this scale also means sometimes higher prices. So this is documented for main battle tanks or for self-propelled howitzers, for many of the equipment that we have sent to Ukraine. In the case of new cutting-edge technologies, what Ukraine is showing is that they've ramped up the production of, let's say, drones very fast. And actually the cost of providing these drones is slowing down, is decreasing by a lot. So the downsides, again, we are moving back to the same argument of trust. Is, do we have this trust among the member states, or do we have the same trust level between the American side and our side? Because if we don't believe that our European counterparts will be there, you can end up buying American, which and as we already see from like the developments of the industry in the last years, they cannot really catch up with demand. So the deliveries that, for example, for the combat aircrafts in the last 5 years, they are not matching demand, and the delays are substantial. So the US industrial base is also having some issues in providing all the equipment that they have committed to provide. And on the European side, as I mentioned, like we are building this capacity, but it's going indeed to take some years. We have increased the production substantially, but of course you also need the commitment from the governments that demand will be there in 2-3 years' time, and know that if we don't see any perception of threat, the demand will disappear.
Mr. Farský, the Commission introduced the Rearm Europe plan. Is that enough to build the trust of the industry that they can invest?
I would like to say yes, but I'm not sure. 'Cause I think that the key word that was mentioned here is the trust of Europe, and when there's not enough trust among the European states, there will never be better cooperation between or among the states. And looking at the Kubilius white paper, he wrote it directly. He said, okay, let's invest more, better, together and European. And doing this means that we will help not only the defense sector, but we will help the whole Europe, the economy of the whole Europe. Because I think that the defense industry might be, or defense spending might be the backbone of the investing in Europe, of a common investment. But frankly said, I think that this program is fine, but the amount of money being used conditionally in a collaborative way is quite a low one. It creates higher investment, but still low. So I think that we have to discuss something like a European defense mechanism or something like that to build really a fund that will be helpful for the whole Europe, for the common procurement, for example, for air defense, shield or some satellites, something that is not only for one state, for the defense of one state, but something what needs more states in common, the best one, all the European states. And then we can have a fund that will be helpful for it, and we can learn through these projects and build a trust through these projects. So I think that might be the way.
One of the ideas is joint borrowing, but we've heard from some member states that they are not really willing to agree with that. So do you think it is a way forward?
I think we have two possible solutions. We can spend. It might happen that all the states will promote that they will spend about, I don't know, 1/4 or 0.5% of their GDP to joint fund that will invest in joint defense. Or we can use the Eurobonds. I can imagine as well. We are not in a peace times anymore, so we should discuss such things as well. And look at the defense investment and look at the Draghi report. You can see many common problems that might be solved through the defense investment that will be helpful not only for the defense sector but for the whole Europe. So that's something I think we should look at, and not looking at the defense spending as something that is just spending, but is investment. So to change the narrative of this topic.
Mr. Schmitt, Private capital is also important. So what do you need from politicians to unlock that?
First of all, I mean, it cannot replace public spending. I think this is also important, right? I mean, you have to have the money to buy the equipment that is produced, and this comes from the public side, okay? I think we should not forget that. Sometimes I have the impression that private investment also is even more important. It should come second. Then, I mean, things are changing with respect to that. We have seen that a couple of years, for example, before the war in Ukraine in particular, there was a lot of investment going into sustainable investment products, and they basically, by definition, excluded defense. Defense was considered as ethical, not responsible, so therefore excluded from that. And this has had a lot of negative effects, not only on the direct investment funds, but also the behavior of all financial operators. So we heard that from our members, for example, that they even had difficulties to open a bank account, right, because they are in defense business. They are not allowed to buy renewable energy because it goes for the defense industries, right? So this went quite far. We have seen over the last 2 years that this is changing, right? So also investors' behavior is changing. Also because it becomes a market that is interesting to invest in from a financial perspective, right? Again, here I think we are in the right direction, I would say. This does not mean that the problem is solved everywhere. I think that it's a big difference these days when you look at the big companies that are listed on the stock market, right? I don't think that they have today difficulties to get access to funding. The problem lies more in the supply chain. If you have smaller SMEs who don't have that cash flow, right, who cannot take the upfront investment, this brings us a bit back to the way we procure. Right? It takes a lot of time. You announce something, but as long as it doesn't come, you cannot take that risk to invest. And this is in particular a problem for the smaller companies in the supply chain. It's also when you look at a specific category like the startups that invent really based on the lessons learned from Ukraine, for example. I mean, there's a lot of risk capital now going into this domain as well. So again, it is changing, and I'm quite optimistic that it goes into the right direction. I mean, I find it interesting when we talk to the financial sector, for example. 2 years ago, we had to convince them that it is responsible to do that. Today, we rather have to explain what are the specificities of the companies, how they can help. So there is a will of the financial sector also to invest, right? But the two have to find their way because it is a special market, right? When you think in terms of transparency, the information that you provide to an investor, there's a lot of classified information. Just to give one example of where problems can also come from. But I'm more optimistic on this today than I used to be 2 years ago. I mean, maybe just one thing, there's often in that context, people point at the European Investment Bank that, as you may know, has also changed its policy quite considerably, right? They do what they can, but they still exclude the hardcore defense business from their lending policy. And I believe, or we believe, that this is important as a signal to the financial market. Maybe not so much the actual money that they would mobilize if they eliminated that exclusion, but we hear that from many banks and insurances, right? That, yes, why do you want us to do this when even the EIB doesn't do it? So I think this could be, for example, an interesting signal on that.
Mr. Mejino-López, we've talked about public money, about private money. Which one do you think is more important?
So I think there is consensus that basically demand will create supply. So the problem now is how can we create this demand, and that's why the European Commission has said the safe proposal, and we, like both Parliament and Council, will work on it. The issue on the supply seems to be rather minor in terms of exactly tackling the financing problems for SMEs, and the EIB is already working on that. But for major defense companies, there are some soft barriers, such as the ESG requirements and basically the stigma that the defense sector used to have in the last years, but this seems to be reduced recently. So now the issue is how do we tackle the demand. Here, we not only need to find the money, but we also need to look at how we spend it. And it's very important that we set the clear incentives for the national countries to actually spend the money on defense to fix the procurement problem we have in terms of fragmentation that still leads to the lower scale of the European economies. In terms of the new emerging startups, we are already having a race against the US, for example, and the joint venture going to American startups in defense, such as AI and drones, and mixing both technologies, is actually more than 2 times the joint venture that is going to the European counterparts. So we need to fix this all together. This comes from the institutional side in terms of capital markets union at the EU level, but also at the spending that we are having at the European and national level, because again, it's a national competence. We need to set the incentives for the member states to actually spend together and spend better.
Mr. Schmitt, you wanted to react?
No, I just want to stress what you just said about we have to improve the way we cooperate, right? And you said that we have to start working all together on these big projects to learn to trust each other. I find that an odd point because, I mean, we are living together here for decades and we have cooperated in so many things. The problem is that we are not overly good in defense cooperation. Right? And for example, one of the reasons why member states buy from the US is FMS, foreign military sales. It's a very easy way for them to buy equipment. Our procurement systems also have to change. It's not only industry, right? We have to procure differently. And here we have to become much faster, leaner and meaner. Right? And otherwise, indeed, we will have difficulties to become more efficient and get the bigger bang for the buck that we need.
We are nearing the end of our time here, so I will ask each of you the same question. What should be the #1 priority right now for European institutions when it comes to the defense industry? Mr. Farský.
Very difficult question, because it's not a question of European Union to build the defense abilities of the Europe. It's a question of the member states. So I think first we should learn and try to cooperate more, because that's the way to a better investment, more effective investment, and in a safer future.
Mr. Mejino-López.
So I'm going to cheat a bit, but I think that the key target should be to actually build the trust, and this will allow the member states to actually coordinate themselves, to carry the joint procurement, and eventually improve the single market. That should be our aim also in the defense sector. And this will solve many of the issues that we have addressed.
Mr. Schmitt, is it also
I have actually
for
2
you?
points. I mean, my first point is we have to build trust also between institutions, EU institutions, right? And also between member states and the Commission. There's also a lot of turf battles between organizations that are not helpful, right? Here also, I think trust would be good. And my second point, I think it would be important to have in the next MFF an important budget line for defense. I mean, we see that member states spend a lot, but if the EU wants to make a difference, right, and wants to have the means to push for greater cooperation, you have to have something in your own budget as well. As long as the EU sticks at the level that it is, it will not make a difference in favor of more cooperation. So you have to be able, as a European Union, to really support your financial instruments, your programs and defense instruments with the necessary envelopes. Otherwise, it will not make a difference at all.
So we are ending with a strong call for the EU institutions. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time.